Sometimes you just need a quick read that's doing some unique stuff, and that is what this one was for me. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to be talking about Darien, Empire of Salt by C.F. Iggulden. This is Con Iggulden writing under a different name here because this is fantasy and he is mostly known for writing historical fiction. Now, I have not actually read any of Con Iggulden's historical fiction, I will note. So this is my first time with this author, but I feel like there were some things here that made me feel like it makes sense that he writes historical fiction, just because of the way some things were approached, which I will get into here. This one, I feel like the tagline actually does a pretty good job for once, which is always hit or miss if you read a lot of books, but we have. An orphan and an old swordsman, a hunter and a pitiless killer, a young thief and a cynical chancer. And I suppose that's not the whole thing. That's describing the six strangers that the story is going to center around. And that's kind of what we do here, is we're introduced to these different characters, and then their stories end up kind of intersecting, and of course around the titular city of Darien. And this does a few different kind of archetypes with characters, like, you know, the hunter, who's a really good hunter because he has a knack, essentially, which a knack specifically means some sort of like random magic, which I actually think was really interesting. So, you know, I'm going to get off on a tangent already, but that's one of the things I think that was interesting, is the way the world is built here, because there's this idea of just a knack, which means you have like some small magical ability for something. And this could be different things. And it's referenced that apparently it's not uncommon for just random people to have a different random thing. I like that. It's just the kind of idea that you might go to some random city and there's somebody who has a knack for something that maybe helps them with creating things or doing this or doing that. And it kind of gives you endless possibilities. So it's an interesting way to do it. But our hunter, who has a knack, that actually lets him kind of like briefly see what's going to happen in the future, which he uses for hunting. And then we have also a girl we're introduced to, who her knack is she actually negates magic. And then we have somebody who is just, he goes around doing odd jobs, trying to be important, who uses a lot of magical items. We have our killer, who's a fantastic shot, as well. And then the orphan and the old swordsman, which some interesting things going on there too. The orphan, who seems to be able to pick up skills instantly, and the old swordsman, who's from a different country, who is trying to just pass along some of his knowledge to these kids to get them off the street. And the first thing I want to mention is I think the characterization is done really well here. We're introduced to these characters, and they all get kind of a nice backstory right off the bat, so we kind of know them. Like, you know, it's not just the hunter, it's also a family man who's, you know, lost his son, and his wife and his daughters are sick with this plague, and that's kind of his motivation there. The old swordsman, we immediately were told about how tough he is on these kids in this gang, and that, you know, if they don't act right and do what he says, he's going to kick them right out to the curb, but alone. And of course, he hasn't actually done that in years. He'd probably be surprised if you told them that, but that kind of thing. So, like, things doing. And the characters, they don't start as being, like I said, particularly, like, it's not like, oh, this is the most original thing. Some of them follow those kind of standard archetypes, who things you've seen with some of those tropes, but then we open up from there, and that's kind of set up as the building block, which I think can work. It's a good way, especially when you have a novel this short, of introducing a character, giving you something that you're familiar with this type of character, so you kind of have a feel for who they are, and then you build off of that and go, instead of just building them up completely unique going from there. So that's what starts off. And the other thing I think that stood out to this here, with the characters and the plot, like I said, is just there are a lot of surprising things that happen here, where you're not sure what's going on, or all of a sudden something will be kind of thrown at you, and it's like, oh, I definitely did not see that coming. So some interesting twists and turns that happen multiple times, and apparently in the later books. I have not read any of the other books yet, but apparently this continues. But you have some things like that where you're like, oh, okay, what just happened here, in a really good way. And then some interesting, like I said, things with the world, with what's being set up. We have this situation with Darien, but we also get to see some other parts, hear about what's going on, understand a little bit about the political structure, that type of thing as well, and also just get some hints about magic and that type of thing as well. So it does a good job setting the scene, building on these characters and going from there. My critiques come in, and one of them, I feel like, I wonder if this is because of him being a historical fiction writer primarily, which is what I was referencing, it feels like things sort of just happen, and we don't always really get an explanation for why they happened. It's just like things are kind of happening. Now, I will say, I've said specifically, this is like a 300-page book. It's slightly, I think, over 300 pages. It's short. So a lot happens, and you're gonna have to cut out some. So instead of having all of this fluff, we're like, oh, we explained this and that, we don't really do that here. I feel like I was missing a little bit sometimes of explanation, where I'm just like, okay, these people are just now gonna go do this thing, or they're gonna go do that thing, or this thing happens. And I feel like sometimes I was missing a little bit more of an explanation of why. And I feel like when you're writing historical fiction, to an extent, you can just write, this happened because it did happen, and that's kind of what you know it happened. You don't need to explain why necessarily. So I wonder if maybe that's just me. I mean, that's complete speculation, but that was one of my kind of minor critiques. The other thing was, it did feel like we kind of shifted focus suddenly sometimes as well. So this kind of plays into the same thing. There's one arc here where it's just all of a sudden, we're going to go do this. This is what we're going to go do out of nowhere. And we get some like background on it a little bit, but we're just going to go do this. And then this is a really big focus. And there's another time toward the back half where we're introduced to a different character who then seems very important and is getting a lot of screen time, and also seems like it's kind of out of nowhere. So a few things there made it feel a little bit clumsy at times. I think, though, partially it's not necessarily that it really is clumsy. I think partially it's just it's maybe by design to some extent, because of the fact that it is a short and it is a quick novel. So this is one I had some issues with, although I did enjoy overall. But it's also one that was exactly what I needed in the moment, which is I wanted something short. This was, by the way, this was sent to me by Books with Genghis Khan. I mentioned in my wrap, I forgot to mention here, and so thank you for that. I mentioned that I was looking for something kind of short, different, easy to get through, and he recommended this, and then he ended up actually sending me a copy, which was super nice of him. And so this was exactly what I needed at the time. So I definitely recommend this if you want something that moves quickly but does not have fluff really at all, and it's just setting up interesting character plot and world building, even though sometimes you're not getting a ton of depth there, and I do like that. So that's where it's also just with my taste, I like those kinds of things, but you're not always in the mood for that, and I wasn't at the time in the mood for that. So this worked really well, I think. This is one that, although it's a little bit mixed here, I'm very intrigued to see where the series goes, and I will absolutely be continuing. From what I've heard, the books just get better and better as you go along in this trilogy, so that has me really excited, because there's a lot of good stuff here. There's the seeds of a ton, and there are just some huge things that happen as well, because you're moving very quickly, and especially the second half of this book, there is so much action, there is so much going on, and things happening very quickly. And once again, things do not happen in the way that you would expect either. There's a lot of twists and turns, and they feel just like, hey, this is just what happened once again. So that's where it's that double-edged sword, where I want a little bit more explanation there, but because of the fact that the novel works like that, where you're not always getting a ton, it's just like, this is what happens. And so because of that, there's not a lot of foreshadowing with these things. They just sort of happen, but they don't feel like they come out of nowhere either. Like the things, they feel like they make sense with where they are. It's just kind of happening rather quickly. So there you have it. This is sort of a mixed review, because I really enjoyed this, but it's also not the kind of thing that's always to my taste or with what I look for overall. But in this instance, it did work really well. And so yeah, I'm excited. I will definitely be continuing with this series, because having a nice quick trilogy that I can get through that's doing interesting things and that's really engaging is great to have, especially when I've had a little less reading time lately. So something like this was really easy to get into, and something that I quite enjoyed. So those are my thoughts on Darien, book 1 of the Empire of Salt trilogy. And definitely let me know if you've read this one. I know at least some other people had picked it up because Ben recommended it as well. So let me know if you've read this one, or if you read Con Iggulden, if there's some stuff there that I should check out. If my thoughts on him primarily writing historical fiction made sense, or if I'm just totally, speculating an error, I'd be curious on that too, so definitely let me know. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the link in the description, as always, for the Wizardly Enclave Discord if you want to chat books, whether this book, other books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun, and we would love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.